When you go into Sana'a, the capital of the Yemen, you go back 1,000 years into history. Until the revolution led by Brigadier Salal just a month ago, nothing can have changed here for centuries.
The political division of Yemen into north and south is of recent origin. What isn't recent is the Yemenis' reputation as a fierce and warlike people. Back in the Middle Ages, a dispute over a camel called Batul led to 100 years' war between rival tribes.
Another criticism that's been made of the plan is that it's not so much in the best interests of Aden as to safeguard the future of the British base in Aden.
Well, what I've just said, I think, indicates that we believe it is essentially in the best interests of the people. But of course, anything which contributes towards stability in that area is obviously going to be a good thing for the peaceful maintenance of our base there.
Now, 3 people have been killed and at least 2 injured in the latest attack by Houthi rebels on a merchant ship they say was traveling to Israel.
Out of Yemen, the Houthis have confirmed that Prime Minister Ahmed al-Rahawi, as well as several ministers, were killed during an Israeli airstrike in the capital Sana'a on Thursday.
Most people in the West have only basic and often wrong information about what's happening with the nation of Yemen. In mainstream news, it's dismissed as a matter of Iran-backed rebels upsetting the sacred tradition of international shipping. There's a severe lack of understanding of Yemen's geopolitical importance, its relation to the Palestinian resistance, and its rich history in the anti-imperialist and socialist struggle. The Houthis, or Ansar Allah movement, are not some backward extremist terrorist group, but a continuation of nearly a century of struggle for national liberation. Since 2024, Yemen has been one of the few countries helping the Palestinian liberation struggle. The Bab al-Mandab Strait is a highly significant maritime trade route. Over 6 million barrels of oil, 4% of the world's total oil flow, passes through daily, the vast majority going to the west. On top of that, 30% of the world's natural gas supply is transported through that strait. Yemen has been waging a campaign of drone and missile strikes, first predominantly against commercial and military vessels in the region to disrupt Israeli and Western trade, and then directly targeting Israel. This campaign has provided the US and UK with a rationale for their ongoing military intervention against Yemen. Instead of addressing the root of the issue, Western colonialism and imperialism, escalatory moves by the West do nothing but exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in West Asia. The former Biden administration was quite clear that its intervention is purely for the purpose of defending international shipping. The U.S. views the actions by Yemen as endangering freedom of navigation in one of the world's most vital waterways and jeopardizing trade. And Trump has at worst maintained Biden's imperialist policy regarding Yemen or increased it.
The House and the Senate passed a resolution telling the president that he has to pull U.S. support from the Saudi-led coalition.
Our immediate job must be to end the terrible war in Yemen and provide humanitarian relief there rather than bombs.
The United States has, in fact, been aiding and abetting these horrors of this war.
There is a U.S. imprint on every single civilian death inside Yemen today. Regardless of whether it is American pilots that are dropping the bombs, those are American jets, those are American bombs. This is an American war, whether we want to believe it or not.
The joint resolution on reconsideration fails to pass over the president's veto.
To the US and UK, this conflict is about maintaining global capitalist trade, which is built on resource extraction from the global south to the global north. Yemeni Brigadier General Abdullah bin Amer told Al Jazeera in response to the American and British airstrikes that Washington and London bear full responsibility for creating the military conflict in the Red Sea and must be prepared to pay a heavy price for their aggression. It's vital to look at the historical roots of this potential regional conflict. Yemen's history is inspiring and tragic. Its people have been divided by imperialism and colonialism. The British Empire, through the British East India Company, began colonizing southern Yemen in 1839, separating it from the Egyptian and later Ottoman-controlled north. It would take until 1918 for northern Yemen to gain sovereignty. Under the leadership of Imam Yahya Ahmadiddin, anti-Ottoman insurgency began in 1904. After World War I, Imam Yahya denounced the British division of Yemen into two separate states, with one lacking sovereignty still. He and North Yemen funded guerrilla fighters and feudal lords against British colonial control in the south. In the 1920s to 30s, both Imam Yahya and Ibn Saud, the autocrat of a nascent Saudi Arabia, were seen as anti-imperialist leaders by the USSR because both posed a threat to British interests on the peninsula. Eager to divert Imam Yahya from his focus on the decolonization of British-occupied South Yemen and to forestall Saudi expansion, the British instigated a conflict between North Yemen and neighboring Saudi Arabia, selling arms to both sides as tensions grew over their shared border. In February 1934, Imam Yahya capitulated to British pressure and signed an agreement recognizing British control over South Yemen. The next month, hostilities broke out between North Yemen and the Saudi kingdom, culminating in a swift and victorious Saudi invasion. At the time, communist opinion on the conflict was not monolithic, with the Daily Worker framing Ibn Saud as a British proxy, while other sources assert that both Arab states were manipulated by the British. At the same time, Imam Yahya was openly allied with Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism. In the final analysis, although the exploiting class at the head of the moribund feudal order represented the popular anti-imperialist movement on the Arabian Peninsula, it could only do so inconsistently. In due time, it would be eclipsed. Imam Yahya was assassinated in 1948. His son and successor, Imam Ahmad bin Yahya Ahmadiddin, was the first to forge ties with Arab nationalist states like Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt. These ties to nationalist and socialist movements would eventually undermine the monarchy in North Yemen.
You've mentioned several times, and other spokesmen of the Arab cause have mentioned frequently, the plight of the Palestinian Arab refugees. You seem to place great stress on that. That is, the plight of the people who've been displaced from the territory that is now Israeli or Israeli occupied. Is there, do you consider that their right to repatriation or compensation is an absolute prerequisite for peace? In other words, if the Israelis would not agree to repatriate these people, allow them to return to their former homes, or to compensate them to allow them to settle elsewhere, a peace agreement would be impossible. Is that the Arab view?
Well, as I told you at the beginning, why this problem have been going on for 20 years. After 48, we accepted to go to Lausanne and to attend there with the Israelis and meet through the Conciliation Committee in order to solve the problem of the refugees. according to the United Nations resolution. The United Nations resolution said that they have to return back and be compensated to their homeland from where they were expelled during the war. Then the Israelis refused to implement that. And that's why the problem is going on for 20 years, mainly.
The Israelis say, I believe, that they consider this an international problem and that they are prepared to make their contribution to the resettlement of refugees. Would that be sufficient in your view, or must the Palestinian Arabs have the absolute right to return to their homes if they wish to?
You know, when the Israelis say that this is international problem, that this means that they refuse to implement the United Nations resolutions. And they were refusing to implement the United Nations resolutions from 48 until now.
Also, during the 1950s, Yemenis in British-controlled South Yemen went to the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. They joined the movement of Arab nationalists, or MAN, founded by George Habash, which would be the ideological and organizational breeding ground for most of the left-wing Arab movements in West Asia, like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PLFP, and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or DFLP.
We know that what we are facing here is actually American imperialism and not only Israel. All the raids we are facing in the Lebanon and before that in Palestine, we know that Israel is actually able to practice such bad deeds because of American backing of Israel. We want this to be very, very, very clear. And we in the PFLP, we always stress that our real enemy is not Israel only and Zionism. It is American imperialism who is backing Israel because Israel is playing a bodyguard for American imperialistic interest in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf region. That is why we don't want at the present moment, and we refuse any relations with the American government.
Both of these are currently in the united front of the Palestinian resistance, with groups like Hamas leading the armed struggle against Israeli occupation and settler colonialism. North and South Yemen in the 1960s went through revolutions and civil wars due to rising ideological and class antagonisms. Vietnam, Cuba, Algeria, Korea, and China all went through significant socialist revolutionary periods that also inspired many parts of the global South. The British and French started their transition from colonialism to neo-colonial control over Africa, which led to many countries gaining independence in some form. In 1962, Imam Ahmad of North Yemen passed away, and his son was overthrown in a coup. The new regime was called the Yemen Arab Republic and went through a vicious civil war until 1970. Egypt funneled tens of thousands of troops, tanks, and equipment to the new nationalist state, as well as aid from socialist countries. The monarchist rebels, led by tribal lords, were supported by Saudi Arabia, the US, the UK, and Israel. In effect, this civil war created the new front in the Cold War. On October 14, 1963, anti-colonial figure Rajab bin Ghalib Labouza was assassinated in British-controlled southern Yemen. It was the spark of an anti-colonial revolution. Two different movements formed: the left-wing National Liberation Front, the NLF, and the Arab Nationalist Front for the Liberation of Occupied South Yemen, or FLOSY. They would fight the British and each other until 1967, when news of the British involvement in the Israeli Six-Day War broke. Mass mutinies spread in the colonial army in Yemen, the mutineers siding with the NLF. The last British colonizer left South Yemen on November 30th, 1967. By that time, the NLF had held 3 congresses, the first of which had produced its national charter, which stated its opposition to colonialism and imperialism. Marxist-Leninists took full control of the NLF and South Yemen in 1969, renaming it the People's Republic of South Yemen, later the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, the PDRY, the only socialist state in West Asian history. Eventually, the NLF would evolve into the Yemeni Socialist Party, the YSP. The socialist state would last until 1990. In its time, it enacted sweeping and deep reforms in the society, economy, and politics of Yemen. It immediately nationalized the majority of corporations and enterprises. The PDRY enacted the Agrarian Reform Law of 1970, which encouraged tenant farmers and sharecroppers to take the feudal lords' land themselves and gave them the right to redistribution. In 1971, it developed a new constitution which gave all political power to the working people. It called for the abolition of all forms of colonialism, Zionism, and racial discrimination. The Constitution supported scientific and artistic innovation and the protection and improvement of the environment. It smashed Yemen's old caste and class structures by codifying equality between men and women, stating that all citizens are equal in their rights and duties, irrespective of their sex, origin, religion, language, education, or social status. It gave medical care and education as a right to all. Collective property, worker co-ops, and mass organizations such as trade unions were considered the basis of the national economy. Not only did it give basic human rights, rights that are lacking even in some Western democracies, but it codified scientific socialism and democratic centralism as the foundation of the state and society. The PDRY also enacted the 1972 Housing Law and the 1974 Family Law in efforts to revolutionize Yemeni society and class structures. The PDRY during this time had been funding and supporting the National Democratic Front, the NDF, in North Yemen, but by 1974 had ceased the militant armed approach in favor of a diplomatic unification of the two Yemeni states. The North Yemeni president, Ibrahim al-Hamdi, was tragically assassinated just 2 days before a much-anticipated meeting with the South. His assassin, Ahmad al-Ghashmi, took control of the government of North Yemen, the Yemen Arab Republic, and became a de facto Saudi puppet. A year later, he too would be assassinated, launching the socialist-led South against the Saudi-controlled North in a civil war. The Saudis supported a fundamentalist group called the Islamic Front. After the Civil War, it would go to Afghanistan to fight the USSR on behalf of the Saudis and the West. The PDRY would go through internal factionalism after the war with the North, and eventually fall into civil war itself, weakening it past a point of no return. The fall of the Eastern European Socialist Bloc and the USSR led to a massive economic crisis, like in many other socialist countries. In 1990, Yemen was unified peacefully into a single country and state. Ali Abdullah Saleh was named president of the new state, and the first parliamentary elections were in 1993. However, perceived irregularities in the results favored a revitalized Islamic Front, reconstituted as the Islah Party, over the Yemeni Socialist Party. The socialists returned to the south to start a new revolution against the Yemeni state, but ultimately failed. Another opposition party was the Party of Truth, and a key figure in that party was Hussein al-Houthi. He led the Believing Youth movement, which promoted Zaidi Islam. Al-Houthi preached the peaceful coexistence of all Islamic sects. The September 11 attacks and subsequent U.S. invasions of Arab and Central Asian countries led to the Believing Youth movement going from an Islamic social movement to a political movement. Internal discussions on colonialism and U.S. imperialism started to change the movement. In 2002, the Houthi slogan was created. God is the greatest, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. It has, of course, drawn criticism, but the Ansar Allah movement would continue to evolve through massive struggles. Ansar Allah became the voice of Yemeni dissent against the Saleh government. Saleh put a $55,000 bounty on al-Houthi, arrested thousands of people, and launched a military operation in the highlands of Yemen to stamp out this opposition movement. Like a vicious cycle, the Ansar Allah movement would fight the Saleh-led and Saudi-backed forces from 2004 to 2010. The rebels offered a truce to prevent further civilian casualties, and the Yemeni government offered a 5-point ceasefire which was agreed by all parties. Unfortunately, peace would not be in the cards for the Yemeni people. The next year, in 2011, the Arab Spring shattered West Asia and North Africa. IMF-enforced neoliberal austerity had destroyed the internal economy of Yemen. Massive debt and unemployment led to significant unrest in Yemen. Saleh resigned and escaped to Saudi Arabia, so Vice President Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi became president. The next year, a presidential election where Hadi was the only candidate took place. Ansar Allah and the Yemeni Socialist Party boycotted the election. From 2013 to 2014, the Hadi government started the National Dialogue Conference. It was an attempt to get every political faction and party together to discuss the future of Yemen and its development. Through this process and its natural alliance with the Yemeni Socialist Party, Ansar Allah reformed and opened up its movement and organization. This is the event that created the first Politburo for Ansar Allah, and spokespersons like Dr. Ahmad Sharafuddin and Abdul Karim Jadban became the new democratic face of Ansar Allah. Sadly, both would be assassinated before the National Dialogue Conference ended. The Hadi government cut oil and gas subsidies, which caused prices for the average Yemeni to skyrocket. Huge protests formed, but the state responded with massacres. By September 21, 2014, the situation became too much for the opposition parties. Ansar Allah launched a full-scale revolution to stop the killing of innocent civilians. Armed units called the People's Committees with members of the Yemeni Socialist Party stormed the capital Sana'a and captured it within hours. It did not overthrow Hadi, but compelled him to drop all IMF-induced policies and signed the UN-sponsored Peace and National Partnership Agreement, which stipulates a government inclusive of all factions and parties. The glorious September 21st revolution emerged as a natural extension of the Yemeni people's struggles for liberation and progress. Today, the Ansar Allah stand as the vanguard heirs to the Yemeni national movement, embracing national issues against imperialism and Zionism and seeking justice for historical struggles, said Anas al-Khadi of the Yemeni Socialist Party, describing the revolution. The YSP did split over the revolution. Many of the old leadership went to Saudi Arabia and have been expelled, while many of the rank and file support the Ansar Allah movement. This action wasn't a sectarian decision, but one agreed upon by all progressive forces and parties in Yemen.
وبالتالي عندما نشاهد المقاتلين من كل مكان، من كل مناطق الجمهورية، من كل طوائف الشعب اليمني، وكل عائلات الشعب اليمني، ولديهم شهداء ولديهم جرحى ولديهم وبالتالي الهدف الأساسي هو مقاومة العدوان. هذا لا يختلف عليه أحد. قد يكون هناك بعض الخلافات حول من يسيطر على القرار السياسي. لا يوجد هناك فرض سياسات محددة أو منع أحزاب من أن تعمل. الجميع يعمل. هناك في حركة أنصار الله من الحزب الاشتراكي من أحزاب أخرى هناك تعاون ومشاركة بين أنصار الله وبين المؤتمر الشعبي العام وبين أيضا بقية الأحزاب الأخرى التي يشكلوا تكتل حزبي كامل البعثي والناصري وغير ذلك. وشاركوا حتى مع أنصار الله في المفاوضات.
13 opposition parties came out instantly to support this revolution. The Amma Party, the Justice and Development Youth Party, the Yemeni Dignity Party, the Al-Arar Organization, the Yemeni Labor Party, the National Accord Party, the Yemeni Progressive Organization, the Peace Party, the Future Party, the Arab Spring Party, the Liberation Front Party, Freedom and Justice, and the National Democratic Front Party. They said the revolution represents all the Yemeni people. A revolutionary committee was formed from all the revolutionary parties, creating the foundation for a new united front for a national liberation struggle for Yemen. Hadi resigned and fled to the southern port city of Aden to foment another Yemeni civil war.
الاعتبار الأساسي هو إعادة الهيمنة السعودية الأمريكية على الشأن اليمني. لا شك أن المصالحة في المنطقة وخاصة في اليمن، ولا شك أن الإدارات الأمريكية المتعاقبة كانت تدرك أن اليمن لديه ثروات هائلة، ثروات نفطية وغازية هائلة، وهي تدرك قبل ذلك أيضا أن لها موقع استراتيجي هام على باب المندب تسيطر على تفكير الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية إلى جانب مصالح النفط ومصالح الغاز وغير ذلك. والموقع أنه عندما ينظر الإنسان قرار شن العدوان كان من الولايات المتحدة من واشنطن، والطائرات التي تحوم جميع مناطق اليمن وتحمل قنابل اللي هي أمريكية والقنابل الأمريكية. الطائرات التي تزود هذه الطائرات بالطائرات العملاقة تزود الطائرات المقاتلة بالنفط أو بالبترول هي أمريكية. غرف العمليات أمريكية وأيضا يشارك فيها بريطانية وربما فرنسية، أو بالتالي هذه مشاركة فعالة. المواقع العسكرية التي يتم ضربها يتم تحديدها من قبل وسائل التجسس الأمريكية، سواء عن طريق الأقمار الصناعية أو عن طريق الطائرات التجسس. وبالتالي ليس للسعودية أو الإمارات أو الدول التي شاركت ليس لها أي دور أساسي سوى أنها تنفذ ما يصدر إليهم توجيهات وتعليمات. حتى أولئك العملاء المتواجدين في الرياض ليس لديهم لا طائرات ولا سفن ولا مدرعات ولا شيء، وبالتالي القول بأنها حرب أهلية غير صحيح. لو وجدت حرب أهلية لا حسمت في لحظة، باعتبار أن الطرف الأقوى والطرف الأكثر وطنية هو المهيمن على الشأن اليمني. الحرب حرب خارجية وشنت بطائرات وبدعم بدعم مادي ودعم عسكري كان يستهدف الشعب اليمني بأكمله ومقدراته.
The Revolutionary Committee announced a constitutional declaration and formed a new government for Yemen in response to Hadi's counter-revolution. From 2015 to 2022, the new Yemeni state, led by a coalition with Ansar Allah at its head, fought off the Hadi-led rebels in the south and a Saudi invasion in the north, which were completely backed by the Western imperialist powers. At least 233,000 people would be killed in a conflict some scholars called a genocide. Nearly 10 million Yemenis faced famine during this period of Western and Saudi intervention, and Human Rights Watch documented at least 90 unlawful airstrikes against civilian targets. In this conflict, the Saudis started to paint Ansar Allah as a tribal group and a proxy of Iran.
وربما هناك دعم سياسي، لا شك في ذلك، ويدعم موقفنا سياسيا. غير ذلك لا يمكن أن نقول هناك أي دعم مادي أو دعم عسكري أو دعم، ربما دعم فني، هذا ممكن أن يكون، وهذا ليس بالعيب. وحقيقة القول بأن إيران غير متواجدة، نحن حضرنا 5 جولات مفاوضات لم تكن إيران بجانبنا، بعكس الطرف الآخر كان السعودية بجانبه، والسفراء الأمريكي والبريطاني والفرنسي إلى جانبين في كل المباحثات، ولا يسيرون ولا يستطيعون أن يقرروا شيئا إلا بموافقة السفير السعودي محمد الجابر. لا يوجد أسير إيراني، لا توجد سلاح إيراني تم الاستيلاء عليه من قبل الطرف الآخر. لا يمكن لأي سلاح أن يدخل الأراضي اليمنية، لأن أبسط الحاجات الإنسانية للشعب اليمني والأساسية لا تصل، لأن هناك حصار خانق، وبالتالي كل هذه الحجج حجج واهية. هذه كانت نوع من الدعاية التي تحاول أن تخفي حقيقة العدوان.
The nomenclature of Houthis is used to paint them as a tribe and not a big tent organization. The reality is the Ansar Allah movement developed into and continues to develop a united front with all the progressive parties, and now a majority of the population of Yemen are in Ansar Allah-controlled territory. This isn't some minor terrorist group or a tribal rebellion that is secretly Iran meddling in the region. Even the Washington Post admitted Tehran's support for the Houthis is limited, and its influence in Yemen is marginal. It is simply inaccurate to claim that the Houthis are Iranian proxies. As Yemen aims to take control of the majority of the country from the Saudi-backed rebels, it has begun to launch offensive operations. In 2019, Yemen's missile attack on facilities owned by Aramco, Saudi's largest oil producer, cut the kingdom's oil production by 50%. The development of the United Front in Yemen propelled Saudi Arabia to pursue a peaceful resolution with the new de facto state of Yemen. The U.S. would even delist Ansar Allah as a terrorist group after years of pressure by progressive forces within Yemen and internationally. The main mediator, Oman, was able to broker a ceasefire between all Yemeni factions in December 2023. Peace talks between Yemen and Saudi Arabia are continuing, and both sides are still posturing towards peace regardless of the escalation in the Red Sea.
بدأت بعروض قدمها السيد عبد الملك في بداية العدوان أن نحن نود أيدينا بالسلام، ولكننا نريد سلام مشرف وسندافع عن أرضنا، ويجب أن أيضا أن يكون هناك وقف كامل للعدوان وليس فقط هدنة، أن يكون نشأت فتح متواصل على كل الجهات، فتح الميناء والحديدة، دفع الرواتب، الانسحاب من الأراضي الليبية بشكل كامل، فك سراح الأسرى جميعهم من الجانبين. نحن أحرص على الأسرى من كل، حتى من الأطراف المعادية، نحرص على أسراهم أن يترك تم سراحهم، ونحن نتعامل مع الأسرى كضيوف ولا نتعامل معهم كأسرى، انطلاقا من أفكارنا ومبادئنا ومن عرفنا وما ينص على الدين الإسلامي. هناك أيضا جانب يتعلق بالتعويضات. نحن لا نتحدث فقط عن التعويضات فيما يخص إعادة الإعمار لما تم خرابه، ولكن أيضا نقصد ذلك التعويضات لكل من تأثر من الشعب اليمني. كل فرد من الشعب اليمني تأثر، سواء باستشهاد أحد أفراده أو بجرح أحدهم أو مرضه أو إصابة أو استهداف وسيلة معيشته، سواء سيارته أو شاحنته أو محلها التجاري أو أي ممتلكات خاصة به أو منزله. هذه يجب أن تعوض، وتعوض التعويض المنصف، إلى جانب إعادة إعمار ما تم خرابه. المباني الحكومية تم خرابها، تم تدمير المنظومات الكهربائية والمحطات الكهربائية ومحطات المياه.
As previously stated, the birth of Yemeni socialism has the same roots as the resurgence of Palestinian socialism. The PDRY was always in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, and even non-socialist factions in Yemen are still mainly nationalistic and pan-Arab in orientation. Zionism, as well, is rightly viewed in the region as a form of European settler colonialism, and the Zionist project of Israel has always been a de facto client state of Western imperialism, first the British and then the Americans. Yemen has reached a point of internal peace and stability it has not seen in decades. While its spiritual and cultural brothers and sisters in Palestine are facing the worst escalation of genocidal attack by Israel since the Nakba. Depending on the report, the death toll is anywhere from 67,173 killed including 20,179 children. To 680,000 people have been killed in the Gaza genocide, with an estimated 380,000 children. The numbers are truly horrific. South Africa successfully tried Israel at the International Court of Justice for genocide, though with zero material effect. And Yemen has decided it must use its revolutionary military in solidarity with Palestine. Whether it's Zionism or U.S. interventions in West Asia, the result is clear: perpetual blowback and the rise of national liberation movements. We have seen in real and dual time a broad united front in Palestine and Yemen form in recent years for the express purpose of pushing imperialist forces out of their native lands. Perhaps the most significant development is a return to Arab socialism. The PLFP, the DFLP, and the Palestinian People's Party have been working together and with other factions in a more organized manner for Palestinian liberation. The Yemeni Socialist Party and the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen have risen from the ashes within the Ansar Allah movement. U.S. and Western imperialism have spent the last century trying to diminish Arab development, unity, and sovereignty. It's time to stand in solidarity with the oppressed and colonized peoples of the world, organize towards liberation, end the occupations, and get the U.S. and the West's hands off Yemen.
وفي اعتقادي أن المورد البشري هو أهم مورد للشعب اليمني، وهو الذي سيمكن الشعب اليمني الوصول إلى أعلى مراتب التقدم والنهضة. وقد ثبت أثناء العمليات العسكرية والحروب أن المقاتل اليمني جسور في قتاله، وأنه أيضا لديه ذهنية عالية للتصنيع ولتنمية الصناعات العسكرية، والتي بفضل الله وبفضلها وصلنا إلى حد كبير لتوازن الردع مع العدو السعودي.